Every narcissist has a ghost, not a person who haunts them out of spite, not someone plotting from a distance to ruin their new life, something far quieter and far more permanent. A presence that lingers in the architecture of who they are long after the relationship ends, long after the new partner moves in, long after the story has been rewritten a dozen times to make the ending more flattering. That ghost is almost always the super empath, and the reason she never fully leaves, the reason narcissists carry her for years, sometimes for the rest of their lives, in a place no new relationship can quite reach, has nothing to do with romantic nostalgia and everything to do with something far more unsettling. She was the only proof they ever had that they were capable of being loved as they actually are. If you've loved a narcissist and left, you've probably wondered whether you crossed their mind at all after the door closed. You've probably imagined them moving on effortlessly, replacing you the way they seemed to replace everyone else, swiftly, publicly, with a new mirror already in place before the old one had even finished shattering. What almost no one tells you is what actually happens underneath that performance. Because a narcissist can replace almost everyone in their life. Attention is replaceable. Admiration is replaceable. Even affection in its shallowest form is replaceable given enough time and enough new sources willing to offer it. What is not replaceable, what cannot be manufactured, faked, or rushed into existence with someone new, is the very specific thing a super empath offered, which most people spend their whole lives never fully understanding they were even capable of giving. Let's be precise about what that thing actually was, because it's the key to everything that follows. A super empath doesn't love a narcissist the way most partners do. Most partners fall into one of two categories. They either see the narcissist clearly and leave quickly, unwilling to invest in someone who shows early obvious warning signs, or they don't see clearly at all, swept up in the charm and mistaking love bombing for genuine devotion, staying because they haven't yet learned to read the pattern. A super empath does something almost no one else does. She sees the whole picture, the wounds, the manipulation, the grandiosity, the fragile architecture underneath the performance, and she stays anyway, not because she's confused about what she's looking at, but because she's chosen with full clarity to love the person underneath it. For a narcissist, being loved this way is not comfort in the ordinary sense. It's something closer to salvation, because underneath almost every narcissistic personality lies a wound most of them will spend their entire lives avoiding, a deep, foundational belief that if people ever truly saw them, not the performance, not the curated image, but the actual unfiltered person, they would be rejected completely. This belief usually forms early, often in childhood, often as the result of conditional love that only arrived when they performed well enough, achieved enough, entertained enough to earn it. The mask isn't vanity. It's armor built around a terror so old, most narcissists have long forgotten its original shape. A super empath, without ever intending to, becomes the single piece of evidence that the terror was wrong, that the real, unmasked version of them was lovable all along. And once someone has experienced that, even once, even briefly, a part of them will spend the rest of their life quietly searching for it again, whether they ever admit that search out loud or not. This is the mechanism behind why narcissists never move on from super empaths in the way they move on from everyone else. It isn't longing in the romantic sense you'd recognize from an ordinary heartbreak. It's something structural, the absence of a very specific kind of proof they didn't know they needed until it was gone. And here's what makes this even more complicated, even more inescapable for them. No new partner can generate that proof, no matter how devoted, no matter how patient, no matter how much they love the narcissist in their own right, because the proof was never just about being loved, it was about being seen completely and loved anyway. A new partner who doesn't yet know the full pattern, who hasn't yet witnessed the worst of what the narcissist is capable of, cannot offer that same proof because their love, however genuine, is still love extended toward an incomplete picture. It's easy to love someone whose flaws you haven't fully encountered yet. It is an entirely different, far rarer thing to love someone after you've seen everything. And the narcissist knows this on some level, even if they can never quite articulate it. This is why so many narcissists, months or years after a super empath leaves, find themselves inexplicably comparing every new relationship to the one they destroyed, not out of nostalgia for her specifically, but out of a hunger for the exact quality of love she offered, a quality that becomes rarer and more valuable the longer they search for it and fail to find it anywhere else. New partners sense this comparison even when it's never spoken aloud. They feel like they're competing with someone they've never met, measured against a standard they don't fully understand and can never quite meet, because the standard was never really about who loved better. It was about who saw clearly and chose to stay regardless. And that combination, once experienced, recalibrates a narcissist's entire sense of what love is supposed to feel like, usually without their conscious awareness that the recalibration has even happened. Here's the part almost nobody talks about, though, the part that makes this dynamic so much crueler than an ordinary case of not getting over an ex. The narcissist doesn't actually miss the super empath in a way they can access directly. Missing someone requires a certain kind of emotional honesty most narcissists have never developed, the ability to sit with loss, name it accurately, and let it inform genuine change. What they experience instead is a kind of low-grade, chronic dissatisfaction that follows them into every subsequent relationship, an itch they can't quite locate the source of, a sense that something is always slightly missing, no matter how good things look on the surface. They'll blame the new partner for not being enough. They'll blame circumstances, timing, bad luck. Rarely, if ever, will they trace the dissatisfaction back to its actual source, because doing so would require admitting that the thing they lost was real and that they were the one who destroyed it. And this is precisely why the ghost never leaves. A grief that's never named, never processed, never connected to its actual cause doesn't fade the way ordinary grief does over time. It calcifies. It becomes a permanent low hum underneath everything, showing up as restlessness in relationships that should feel settled, as a strange irritability whenever a new partner does something that unconsciously reminds them of her, as an inexplicable heaviness on certain anniversaries they'd never admit to remembering. The super empath doesn't have to do anything to maintain this haunting. She doesn't need to check in, doesn't need to make herself visible, doesn't need to do a single thing to keep her presence alive in the narcissist's internal world. The absence itself does all the work permanently because it's not really her they're missing. It's the version of themselves they only ever got to be in her presence. The version that felt, for however long it lasted, genuinely, fully K. And that version of themselves, once she's gone, becomes almost impossible to access again. Not because it was never real, but because it required something only she was capable of providing consistently. A witness patient enough, perceptive enough, and secure enough in her own worth to call it out of them without needing anything in return except honesty. This is where the second layer of the haunting begins, and it's the layer almost no one talks about because it doesn't fit the popular narrative of narcissists as people incapable of genuine connection. The truth is more disturbing than that in its own way. Most narcissists are capable of moments of genuine tenderness, brief, often unguarded, usually appearing only in the presence of someone who has proven over time that revealing softness won't be used as a weapon against them later. A super empath, through years of consistent, boundaried, clear-eyed love, becomes exactly that kind of proven safe presence. And in her company, something in the narcissist that almost never gets to exist elsewhere occasionally surfaces. Real vulnerability, real humor that isn't performed for effect, real moments of showing up for someone else without an angle attached to it. This version of them was never a lie. That's the crucial, devastating detail. It wasn't a mask over a mask, some deeper layer of performance designed to secure her devotion. It was closer to the truth than almost anything else they'd ever shown anyone. A fragile, occasional, hard-won glimpse of the person they might have been able to become, given enough safety, enough consistency, enough patient witnessing over enough time. And it only ever appeared because she was the one witnessing it. Once she leaves, that version doesn't transfer to the next relationship. It can't because it was never a fixed trait sitting dormant inside the narcissist waiting for anyone to discover it. It was a relational phenomenon, something that existed between the two of them, called into being by her specific presence, her specific patience, her specific willingness to keep responding to the good in them, even when the bad was showing up right alongside it. Without her, there's no one left who knows how to summon it. No one left who recognizes it when it flickers, who responds to it in exactly the way that used to make it feel safe enough to surface again next time. And so gradually it stops surfacing at all. This is the piece that makes the loss so uniquely permanent, so resistant to being solved by any new relationship, no matter how loving, no matter how patient the new partner tries to be. Because a new partner starting from zero doesn't have years of accumulated safety behind them. They haven't yet proven through 1,000 small tests the narcissist doesn't even consciously run, that vulnerability with them won't eventually be punished. Building that kind of trust took the super empath years. Years of steady, boundaried love. Years of staying through hard conversations instead of either collapsing into appeasement or storming out in anger. Years of demonstrating consistently that she could see the worst of them and still choose to remain without that choice ever curdling into resentment or self-sacrifice. Almost no one has the combination of patience and self-respect required to build that kind of proven safe presence. Most people either burn out from the emotional labor long before trust like that has time to form, or they never had the self-possession in the first place to stay without losing themselves in the process. The super empath is rare precisely because she managed both enough emotional generosity to build genuine safety and enough internal boundaries to never let that generosity become self-destruction. That combination is what made the vulnerable version of the narcissist possible to access at all. And it's exactly why, once she's gone, that version goes dormant, sometimes permanently, no matter how many other relationships follow. This is also why so many narcissists who lose a super empath describe, usually only to themselves in the moments they'll never admit to anyone, a specific disorienting sensation of feeling less alive than they used to. Not sad in the ordinary sense, diminished, duller, as though a color that used to be available to them has quietly disappeared from the palette, and no combination of the remaining colors quite recreates what that one used to add to the picture. Friends who knew them before sometimes notice it without understanding what they're seeing. A comment here and there about how the narcissist seems different now, used to have more life in him, isn't quite as sharp as she used to be. What they're witnessing, without the language to name it, is a person who lost access to their own better self and has not, in the time since, found anyone capable of calling it back out. And here is the detail that makes this entire dynamic so uniquely inescapable, the detail that separates it from ordinary heartbreak. The narcissist cannot fix this by becoming a better partner to someone new, because the problem was never really about partnership skills. It was about a specific, rare kind of witness, one who saw everything, judged accurately, and chose to stay anyway out of genuine will rather than naivety or fear. That combination cannot be manufactured through effort. It cannot be rushed into existing with someone new just because the narcissist has finally decided to try harder. It either exists between two specific people, built slowly over years of proof, or it doesn't exist at all. And once it's gone, once the person capable of it has left and taken years of accumulated trust with her, there is no shortcut back to it. Not with her, because the trust she extended was ultimately broken past the point of repair. And not with anyone else, because no one else was there for the years it took to build the version of safety she alone had constructed. So the narcissist is left in a strange, permanent limbo, haunted by a version of intimacy they know is possible because they experienced it once, and unable to access it again because the specific conditions that created it can never be exactly recreated. This is the real reason narcissists never move on from super empaths underneath everything else we've walked through. It was never about her beauty, her patience, or even her love in the ordinary sense. It was about the singular, irreplaceable role she played as the one witness capable of holding the full truth of who they were without flinching away from it and without needing them to be someone else in order to stay. Every relationship that follows her becomes, whether the narcissist admits it or not, an unconscious audition for a role that's already been filled and closed. New partners walk in not knowing they're competing with a ghost, not understanding why their genuine efforts sometimes land with less impact than they should, not realizing that the narcissist's occasional distance or dissatisfaction has almost nothing to do with anything they've done wrong. They're simply standing in a room that was built around someone else's shape, trying to fit into a space that was never designed for them to fill. And this is where the story arrives at its final, quietly devastating truth, the one most narcissists will spend the rest of their lives circling without ever landing on directly. What haunts them isn't really the super empath herself, not as a specific person with a specific face and voice and laugh. It's what she represented. Proof that they were capable, at least once, of being loved completely, without editing, without performance, without the exhausting labor of managing someone else's perception of them every single moment. That proof was the rarest thing they will ever be offered in their entire life, and they let it walk out the door, usually through a betrayal or a pattern of harm they told themselves at the time didn't matter as much as it actually did. Some of them will spend decades chasing an approximation of what they lost, moving through relationship after relationship, each one slightly more hollow than the last, each one ending a little faster as the same patterns resurface with less and less patience from partners who don't have the super empath's particular combination of clarity and endurance. Others will retreat into a kind of practiced numbness, convincing themselves the dissatisfaction is simply the price of adulthood, that everyone feels this quiet hum of something missing, that it has nothing to do with a door they closed years ago and told themselves they didn't need to look back through. A small number, faced honestly with the wreckage of what they lost, will eventually do the only thing that could ever actually change the trajectory. They will stop searching for a replacement and start doing the excruciating internal work of becoming someone capable of offering that same clarity and steadiness to another person, rather than only ever receiving it. If that happens, it will not bring her back, and it was never supposed to. Her healing, her life, her peace were never contingent on whether they ever figured this out. But it is, for them, the only path that leads somewhere other than the same hollow loop, repeating endlessly with different names attached to an identical outcome. For the super empath herself, for the woman who saw clearly, loved fully, and eventually chose herself over a story that could no longer justify her staying, this haunting she leaves behind was never her responsibility to manage, and it isn't a burden she carries forward into whatever comes next. She doesn't need to know it's happening to feel complete. She doesn't need their ongoing dissatisfaction as validation of what she gave, because she already knows what she gave, has always known, long before she ever loved someone difficult enough to test the depth of it, and long after she found the strength to walk away. What she carries instead, on the other side of all of it, is something the narcissist will never fully understand about her again. The quiet certainty that her worth was never contingent on being chosen, defended, or missed by someone incapable of holding on to something real once they had it. She doesn't need to be the ghost in someone else's unraveling story to know her own story was true. She lived it. She felt every part of it clearly, without the distortion the narcissist requires to survive their own reflection. And she gets to walk forward into a life built on that same clarity, not haunted by what she lost because she didn't lose the capacity that made the love real in the first place. She simply stopped offering it to someone who could never learn to deserve it. And somewhere behind her, in a life slowly dimming without the one witness who ever saw it fully lit, a narcissist will spend years reaching for a color that isn't coming back. Not because she took it with her out of spite, but because it was never actually a color he owned to begin with. It only ever appeared when she was the one standing close enough to bring it out of him.